I've been a management geek, I should say, for a very long time. And I've been wondering about all this management stuff as we move into more agile transformations, as we think about what it means to have agile teams and business agility. And I realized that, let me make sure that a lot think that managers when we're using an agile approach. And I suspect that there's any number of reasons for that. First of all, it says nothing about managers in the manifesto. So, fine. And in many of the frameworks, there's no position for managers, except in some frameworks, there's lots of positions for managers, and they're all controlling, they're all directing. So I think that managers have a very bad rap in Agile, right? And this is something I don't understand, I don't want to do. I I find that this is not really what we need. So if I think about management in too many of our organizations, it has not very much to do with leadership and everything to do with control. So back when we had project managers, and I was a project manager, some project managers said, you do this, you do that, you do this other thing. Or they actually gave out tasks as opposed to, please do this feature, please implement this requirement. So that was a lot of control as opposed to leadership. And we cannot afford to have that anymore. We need to have leadership. We cannot divorce management and leadership. They have to be the same, sides of the same coin. So if I think about why management exists, I think about three pieces of this. And I have kind of balloons on this slide because I like to have balloons. I like to think about managers think themselves before they manage anyone else. And it's when you think about how you manage, you can think about how your actions affect the culture of the team and the greater organization. When you think about creating a harmonic whole by leading and serving others, that that means that people remember how you made them feel. And if you think about how you act as a leader, as a manager, every organization exists for just one reason: innovation. Peter Drucker said that back in the 50s or 60s or 40s or something. And so if you think about, I was thinking recently, my father, who is 91, just got an iPhone, and he I made him get the iPhone because he has voice over IP for his landline. Comcast screwed it up. Maybe he screwed it up. I don't know. Right. He was without a phone for over a week. Cell phone, a flip phone, a dumb phone only had 3G. So it was not in his apartment everywhere. And of course, I live in Massachusetts. I am still not seeing him. He has some underlying health conditions with the pandemic. I don't go out much, but I don't want to bring him COVID, right? So we talk on the phone every single day. And when I finally said to him at one point, Dad, you must get a smartphone so you can use Wi-Fi. And he actually said to me, I don't see why I have to innovate at 91. So I said to him, you got to 91 because you did innovate. And this is exactly the problem with our organizations. We need to, if we might not get our organizations to 91, but if we don't innovate, we are not going to get farther. So that's a big piece of it. So there are 7 principles for all managers. Of course, I'm big on principles, not on practices. And if you think about the variables, it's clarified the purpose for everyone involved, build empathy with the people who do the work, create a safe environment, psychologically safe, and um, right now, physically safe, right? We need to be able to keep our distance if we don't want to share this virus. We need to seek outcomes by optimizing for an overarching goal, and we need to encourage experiments and learning, catch people succeeding. So Nancy, when you did those appreciations, I thought that was really lovely. And we manage by exercising our value-based integrity. That's really a big deal. So when I was developing this and writing, um, some people asked me, what about transparency? What about communication? And my answer is that if you use these principles as a leader in the organization, you will get transparency and you will get sufficient communication. So let me talk about a really big challenge for many of our current managers right now. A lot of managers are accustomed to thinking in resource efficiency, where the work assignment arrives, somebody does their part, they hand it off to the next person who does their part, they hand it off to the next person who does their part, blah, blah, blah. And at some point, there's finished work. That's resource efficiency, where we ask people to work as individuals and we look at how utilized are they, right? We actually ask that question. Instead, look at flow efficiency, which is what Agile is based on. It does not matter what kind of agility you're using. It doesn't matter if it's time boxes with iterations or if it's working in flow. It's all about thinking, how do we work as a team to finish the team's work? And that means nobody has their parts specifically. And the interesting thing about flow efficiency is we can look at the utilization of the team. That's what flow efficiency is. So think about your team right now and think about how much time you spend waiting for people on your team to finish their work if you're not already working as a team. So if you start an iteration, for example, and everyone takes their own story, you're still working in resource efficiency. If you limit your WIP, the work in progress for the team, say you have 6 people on the team and you say we will only have 2 stories in flight at any time, now you are working as a team. You are actually more efficient when you work in flow efficiency and you have faster throughput than you do with resource efficiency. And a lot of managers still do not understand this, which is a problem. So I want to talk about 4 things, how managers manage themselves first, how managers lead and serve others, how managers create an environment of innovation, and a little tiny bit about rewards and behavior. So let me talk first about congruence. When I think about managers managing themselves, I think about the satir congruence model with self, other, and context. And I have a little explanation here. I am an exceedingly good blamer. Several months ago, I was taking a shower on the weekend. My husband walked into the bathroom and the lights went out. And I said to him, "What did you do?" So I thought about me, and I really does not regard him well at all, right? It turns out that we had a power outage just at the time he walked into the bathroom. He had nothing to do with that. But where did I go? I went to the finger of blame. Not very nice over here. Now, it's just as bad if you disregard yourself. If you say, "Oh, I've done something wrong," now you're placating other people. And if you're not thinking about the people at all, if you disregard the self and the other, then you're super reasonable. So if you have ever heard anybody say, studies say that pairing is an effective way to create code and tests. Where are the people there? Irrelevant is when you consider not the self, the other, or the context. So if I walked into a meeting and I said, "How about those Patriots, football, Massachusetts, right? Patriots." That would be totally irrelevant. When we're congruent, we balance the self, the other, and the context. This is actually really, really difficult in the organization. Our organizations are built on right now are built on a blaming culture, especially where we think about we ask the senior managers ask the middle managers to make sure stuff gets done, right? That's a thing we hear all the time. The middle managers ask the first line managers of the teams, make sure this stuff gets done. And when the teams have trouble because of the environment for some reason, it's not always safe to send the message back up the chain. That means that we are encouraged too much placating up the chain and too much blaming down the chain. So if you can think, how can I be more congruent today and balance everything that we need? That's a really good way to start. So there are a whole bunch of myths about managing yourselves as a manager. Sometimes it's managers are more valuable than other people. Sometimes it's we cannot possibly admit mistakes. And I will talk about managers believing in indispensable employees or the 10x issue. So back when I was a director, I managed a first line manager who said, um, I will call the first line manager Susan, not her name, and Susan managed somebody called John, also not his name. And John was one of those supposedly 10x developers. He would work all weekend and do all kinds of stuff and leave it for people when they came in on Monday morning. And Susan thought he was wonderful. He was so smart. He was so capable. And she could not understand why the people coming in on Monday morning did not understand anything John had done over the weekend. He was so valuable. He was not so valuable. So we needed to have a conversation about how do you understand the relative value of a person, especially if they do work on behalf of other people. It looks like they're doing something really well, but then if nobody else understands it, is it really all that good? So this business of experts, narrow experts, 10x developers, they turn out often to be more of a challenge than useful. So if you think you have a 10x developer, 10x tester, right, 10x anything in your organization, ask yourself these questions. Does this person actually work well with others? I know of several people who are amazing. They remember code that they wrote 20 years ago, and they can still explain it to you. I should be that smart. I am not that smart, just not. So it's really important. How well do they work with other people? How can they explain it? Do they take feedback and coaching as much as they deliver finished work? So those are the kinds of things to ask to see if you really have a 10x developer. My my experience is that very, very few people are actually 10x developers, or they're indispensable. And I have another guideline. If you think you have an indispensable employee, the first thing you do is fire that person. You move that person to another project or to another place in the organization, and then you ask the team to work without them. Maybe you ask the expert to offer office hours every so often or be on call, but the expert has to divorce him or herself from the team, and that way you move you help everybody on the team build their capability, and the expert gets to do something else. So this business of experts, we really cannot afford to have them. So it turns out that these myths violate a lot of the value-based integrity that we need managers and leaders to have. We need people, and especially with hierarchical power, to be honest, to be fair, to be consistent, for them to take responsibility, for them to treat people with respect, and for them to create safety for themselves and for others. So if you think about how you can avoid these myths, if you look at the myths and you say, "Oh, maybe these are not that helpful stances," when you kind of move away from the myths, that allows you to create a much more safe environment for you to make decisions and for the team to make decisions. So the principles for managing yourself, um, I really like to think about what is the purpose of my management? Where do I add value? And if I think about that, then I can think about how do I build empathy with the people who are doing the work? And especially is delegating the technical work, not just you do this and you do that, it's delegating the the problem and the outcomes. So if you think about problems, we have problems we need to solve, and then the outcomes. That's the stuff that you delegate. You never delegate the piece of work, the task, all that stuff. I found that when I admitted I did not know, I actually built a much safer environment and found that people were much more likely to tell me when they did not know either, which is good. Um, and this business of outcomes by optimizing for an overarching goal, why why do we need this product right now? Why do we need this service right now? What is it? How does this contribute to the overarching goal for the entire organization? And my favorite is always to encourage experiments and learning. I find it a little frustrating that our managers want certainty. They want estimates, and they will hold our feet to the fire for estimates instead of learning from experiments. I really like short experiments that the entire team does. Now, you might think I'm talking about an agile team. I'm actually talking about an agile team, teams of managers, teams of middle managers, teams of senior managers. I find that when everybody starts to think about experiments and learning, we are much more likely to offer coaching, not solutions to people. And this business of catching people succeeding, reinforcing what people do well, and not reinforcing what people do poorly. I can talk about performance reviews later. I am a blunt and direct person. I have been this way since I was born. That part of me is not going to change. What does change is my ability to let people hear my words. So I work really hard on framing things so that people can hear me. Am I still blunt and direct? Absolutely. So I like to be caught succeeding for when I phrase things well, as opposed to being blunt and direct. And then exercising your value-based integrity as a model for the people you lead and serve. So this is all about thinking about your actions. And when I think about managing yourself, I think about moving from expert to coach. So let me just quickly check the chat. Any questions right now before I go on to leading and serving others?
Yeah, I don't see anything yet, but
Okay.
if you do have something,
Okay.
please put it in the chat.
I was wondering if you could
Yeah.
restate what you were talking about empathy and separating the technical. Could you go over that again? Delegate the
Sure. Yeah. So when I think about building empathy with the people who do the work, I have certainly worked for many managers who said, um, it was easier when I did it. It was faster when I did it. It was simpler when I did it? How can it possibly take that long? How can it possibly be that complex? How can it possibly be, right? If you hear the words, how can it possibly be, you hear a little bit of blaming and not a lot of empathy with the people who do the work. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about leading and serving. At first, I did not change the name of this particular book. I said, I talked about practical ways to manage others. And that's when my reviewer said, what do you mean manage? Because you're not talking about controlling and directing. I said, no, I'm talking about leading and serving. So they said, you should call it that. So that's what I did. So managing, when we think about managing others, it's about leading and serving. And you've probably heard of servant leadership. That's certainly a piece of it. But there's also understanding what is the goal we're looking for. So I would like you to think back to the best manager you ever had. Excuse me. How did you feel when you worked with that manager? And I want you to put in the chat, do you remember the work or the teams? Right. You might remember the work. You might remember the team. Think back to the best manager. What was it like to work there? Appreciated and valued? Do you remember, Sherry, if you remember the work or the teams?
What do you mean?
So think about what do you remember about that aside from how you feel or how you felt?
That everybody enjoyed coming to work every day and they look forward to seeing each other every day.
Yeah. And do you remember the people on that team?
Absolutely. I think about them frequently.
Yeah.
And in
That's
the manager himself was a person who was not on site. He was virtual. I never even met him, and he still to this day is the best manager I've ever had.
Yep. So you remember the teams. You remember the people. And Nancy is saying, I remember both. The team was great and the work was fun because of how we worked together. Yeah. So you felt really great. And I see in the chat, supported, empowered, valued, listened, all kinds of really nice things. Now, take just one of your terrible managers. And how did you feel when you worked there? And then I'm going to ask you, do you remember any of the work except to remember how you felt about it? Oh, micromanaged, incompetent. Oh, these horrible things in the chat. Yeah. Sad. I believe that. Can't do anything right. Yep. Frustrated. Now, do you remember the work you worked on? Do you remember the product or the project? Yeah, unaware. I believe that. Do you remember any of that? The actual work that you worked on? Or the people you worked with? Okay, so at least one person says yes. I do remember the work, not the people, somewhat. Remembered both the team and the work. Unguided manager was hands off. I'm free to do what I want. Well, that's interesting. Remember the team. So it's really interesting how we feel with a great manager and with a horrible manager, a terrible manager. And this business of leading and serving is so critical to us remembering the environment, the product, how we felt, and we can feel great and horrible, right? It's not that there's one or the other. And every job has challenging times. However, the more frustrated we are, the sadder we are, the less we enjoy it, the less, at least I remember anything about the work. I don't actually remember the applications. I don't remember the products. I don't remember the customers. I just remember how horrible I felt and how I did not want to go into work any given day. So people remember how they felt as you lead and serve them. So it turns out that McGregor, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, something like that, had this notion of theory X and theory Y. And if you look at theory X, which is in pink on the slide, and theory Y, which is in blue, you can see that a lot of the command and control stuff is all theory X. That people want to avoid work, that people need to be controlled, people don't want responsibility, that money motivates people, people have no creativity except for getting around the rules. But theory Y says people want to master their work and that people can manage themselves and people seek responsibility and people work to learn and accomplish something that is greater than they are and that people are created. If you remember Dan Pink's Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose, that's all theory Y. And agile approaches are built on theory Y. People can do the job. They can master the challenges. They can take responsibility for the work and the relationships and as much more as they need. Now, they might need some support or training, but they can do this. The reason why they can is because people live up or down to your expectations of them. I find that this is fascinating. Every time I expected more of the people I led and served, the more they were able to do. And every time I said, oh, they can't do this. No, they proved me right. So as our assumptions color our actions, and the more we assume that people can do the work and might need to support them with training or coaching or feedback or something, but they can absolutely do the work. So when I think about theory Y thinking, that really enables management integrity. So there's a whole bunch of myths about leading and serving others, that people don't need feedback, that thinking isn't work, that performance reviews or other evaluations are useful, and that you can keep even marginally useful people on the team. So let me ask you this. I can talk to even marginally useful people or performance reviews. Which one would you like me to discuss? I will put that in the chat and I will take requests. This is always a shock to me. Can people type performance reviews? Do I have one more? All right. So I will talk about why performance reviews or other evaluations are absolutely not useful. So I've been a consultant for over 25 years. And before that, I spent about 14 or 15 years inside the organization, something like that, maybe 17. Not so good on arithmetic here. I really like symbolic logic. I got one excellent piece of feedback at a performance review. On my second job out of school, my boss said to me, you get the work most of the way done, Johanna. You get to 95, 96% of the way there. You don't get it all the way over the end, all the way to really, really done. And I said, oh, tell me more about that. I was quite disappointed. I thought I had done a wonderful job. I had, except I was not quite getting everything done. So we talked about that for a few minutes, and he explained to me what I needed to do. This was great. So I said, okay, is this just on the last project? Because I'd done 6 or 7 projects since I had gotten there. He was late on my performance review, and it had been a while since I'd gotten any feedback from him. So he said, no, it's actually been all the projects since you were here. I said, why did you wait so long to tell me? I mean, I'm not happy with the feedback, but I find this feedback really useful. This is something I can work. He said, I didn't think you needed feedback. I'm not doing something right. So we both learned something in that place. One is people need feedback. They need a lot of feedback, not in an agile team, not just from the manager down, but from the people and across. The second thing is performance reviews are almost always about managing salary costs. So I got a performance review at the previous company, and I got a monstrous raise. This is in 1978. I got a monstrous raise of 15%. I was thrilled. And then a colleague of mine told me he had only gotten a 10% raise. So we compared pay stubs. He was still getting paid $3,000 a year more. This is back when salaries were under $20,000 a year. Okay. He was still getting paid $3,000 a year more because they had offered me less money because I was a woman. So, and I of course went into my boss and I said, I want pay parity. I actually do more stuff and better stuff than this guy does. I want to be paid according to my value here. And he said, I can't. I can't do anything for another year. So my performance review, even though I got a monstrous raise and a perfect exceeds expectations everywhere, was not about my performance. It was about what the company felt that they could pay me and about how little they could pay me, as opposed to the feedback I got with the second guy who gave me great feedback. And I have been working for over 40 years now. That one performance review is the only time I got great feedback in a performance review. Now I've had great bosses since then, and they always gave me feedback every week, every other week. Feedback. We need feedback to do a better job. We need to know where we're not getting things all the way to the end. But performance reviews, evaluations from somebody, those are not useful. And in fact, they often do much more damage. If you have ever been in an organization that ranks people, you destroy all trust. And if you think about what we need in agile approaches, we need a collaborative team built on trust so we can efficiency. That's a problem. If we are not, if we still insist on performance reviews and evaluations, we will not get that. So that's why it's really important to say, how do we avoid the performance review business altogether? And the way we do that is by focusing on feedback. We also need job ladders. There's all kinds of stuff that we need to do. But performance reviews are the lazy person's way of trying to offer feedback and manage salary costs. I agree we have to manage salary costs, but we don't have to do it by demeaning the people that we work with, and certainly not the people that we lead and serve. So when managers don't lead and serve, the work really feels like drudgery. It feels, first of all, it feels incongruent and we don't have respect, we don't have sufficient empathy, but we really feel like drudgery. You know the people who don't want to come to work every day. Even though we're all remote well, we're all remote here. I don't know how many of you are actually back at work with other people, but you see them even on the Zooms. They join late, they don't want to be there. I mean, it's just horrible. So we need managers to lead and serve, not control and direct. So if you think about the principles for leading and serving others, the first principle is what, in terms of the purpose, what value does your team offer? And then how can you offer autonomy, mastery, and purpose as a way to build empathy with people? I have found that when I build a psychologically safe environment, I have to teach feedback and coaching. Too few of us actually understand how to offer feedback in a congruent way and how to coach in a congruent way. And I like teaching as much as the next person, possibly more. So I have to really work on my coaching stance and say, which coaching stance do I need at this time? I try and coach with purpose as opposed to coach by default. And when we think about seeking outcomes by optimizing for an overarching goal, that's all about flow efficiency. How can the agile team, how can teams of managers, how can teams of middle managers, how can teams of senior managers seek outcomes by optimizing for that overarching goal? Again, experiments and learning are key because what works for one person is not going to work for another. What works for one team is not going to work for another. And then catching people succeeding. One of my coaching clients said that one of the first questions he asks when he's a new manager or when people come onto his team new and he has that first one-on-one with them, he always asks, how do you like to receive feedback? I should say recognition. Is it okay? Are you okay with public recognition? And everybody seems to say no. So I have said to him, how about if you start using appreciations for something really small every single day for every single person, or at least once a week for every single person. It does not have to be every single day for every single person, but at least once a week. And if you start to appreciate something small for people, they become more comfortable. And especially if you still work in flow efficiency, I think a lot of people are not so excited about being um, singled out for praise, especially if you're working in resource efficiency. I think that that's something that really rubs them the wrong way. So this allows you to exercise your value-based integrity. So when I think about leading and serving others, I think about from the individual to the team, right? This is how we create a harmonic whole. Now, let me talk about leading for innovation. Peter Drucker said, every organization needs one core competence, innovation. So when I ask managers where they spend their time, there's so much in the right-hand column in the tactical, and it's all about execution. And there's so little at the strategic column on the left with understanding the why for the organization and the high-level plans and the long-term thinking and what's unique about this organization now. So there's all kinds of organizational leadership myths. That you can treat everybody the same way, that 100% utilization works. And I'm going to talk about the notion of it's a great idea to standardize on how people work, especially on their Agile approach. Several years ago, I had taught one of my workshops, my Agile and Lean project workshop, to an organization several times. And I had, they had a small IT department, and I was probably, kind of working my way halfway through that department. They were also changing by attraction. So some of the people who had not gone through training said, "Oh, how are you doing that? Looks really good." And I was thrilled, right? That was kind of the best thing, that people were seeing what other teams were doing and learning why that worked. They got a new CIO in, and he said, "We're going to go to Scrum." Okay, so he asked me to give him a proposal for how they could take the entire organization from their Agile and Lean approach, which was not Scrum, to Scrum in the next 30 days. And I said, I can train everybody, but Scrum is actually not sufficient for what you need. Some of your teams need to work in flow because they have way too much production support issues to use Scrum. They are not going to succeed if they use Scrum. There's no way that they can keep enough time in the iteration for them to be able to respond adequately. He said, no, everyone has to do Scrum. Everyone has to do it. I used Scrum in my previous organization, you should be able to teach people how to use Scrum in the next 30 days and what we should do. And I said, okay, if you really want this done in the next 30 days, here's a proposal. He was offended by my proposal because it was a lot of money and a lot of time, because I have not found that it's really easy to teach people Scrum and have them successful in 30 days. People need time to practice, and people need, this particular organization really needed to use cycle time as an estimation approach as opposed to story points. Yeah, there was a whole lot there. I believe he was kicked out about 9 months later. So, yeah, a problem. Standardizing on how other people work is almost never a good idea. You can say, I really want this outcome. That's useful. If you say to people, I want to see a deliverable every single week, I want a demo every single week, that's a wonderful cadence. That totally works. If you're willing to wait for 2 weeks, that's fine. But talk about the outcome you want, not the outputs you want. So there's all kinds of really interesting leadership myths. When I think about the organization and I think about how managers act, if they can define the organization's why, which is the first piece of the strategy, and then they iterate on the actual strategy, none of the strategic planning for a year. I mean, especially not this year. I suspect each of your organizations has iterated on their strategy this year. I have iterated on my strategy, I think, once a month since the pandemic started. It's really, how can I not? And I'm a one-person company. So if you plan for change, and if you say, we have people and they are capable, we can embrace the organization's messiness. We don't have to have a well-oiled machine. Yeah, we don't have machines. We have people. People are messy. Let's embrace that messiness and put it to use for us. Let's use, in the best sense of the word, the people who can do the work. So there's the innovation principles are the same. I think that for clarifying purpose, if you can answer the question, why does your organization exist? And there are many companies who cannot answer that question. That one question will give you so much more value than anything else you've done for strategic planning. And in terms of building empathy, can you reduce the bureaucracy? Every single organization I've worked at or consulted with has rules about accounts payable and all kinds of other stuff. My niece, who is living with us right now, has works as a property manager for a real estate company. They told them this past week everybody has to take their vacation. What do you think all these people are going to do before the end of the year to take their vacation? They're all going to take it around Christmas. All of them. They will have no property managers on site at all around Christmas because everyone has to take their vacation. It's just unbelievable. I understand that they cannot have the vacation time on the books, right? That's a problem for their accounting. But a problem for their accounting should not be a bureaucratic problem for all the employees. In terms of innovation and building a safe environment, how easy is it to disagree with other people in the organization? Respectfully, right? Not meanly, but respectfully. How can you disagree? That might be a very good way to think about how innovative your organization can be. And then the seeking outcomes by optimizing for an overarching goal, experiments and learning, catching people succeeding, and especially if they make a mistake, especially because then you have not killed innovation for the future. So when I think about leading an innovative organization, I think about from managing change to managing for change, right? So a lot of my project management colleagues talk about managing change in projects. And when I first started to talk about managing for change to expect change, they all said, "Oh, that's an interesting idea." It is, and it's a different take on what we might want for change that we want to optimize to work so that we can have change. So let me talk a little bit about culture driving behavior. Kurt Lewin said that behavior is a function of the person and the environment, and especially the reward system. If your organization rewards resource efficiency, you will probably have trouble with your Agile transformation or even just an Agile team. Because if people make money based on what they did as opposed to what the team did, that's a really hard thing. So I am not saying every single person has to just share in what the team gets. I do think that there has to be an individual component plus a team-based component. But instead of all individual or all team, there has to be a way for people to share in how everybody does their work. That's, for me, that's a really huge thing. And it turns out that managers create and refine the culture for everybody at every level. So Sean talks about artifacts, values, and assumptions. And I like to talk about how people treat each other, what people can discuss, and how do you reward people. So think about that. Those are all the things. If you are my husband works for a lovely small company where they swear a lot. I think that this is totally normal. However, I guess somebody came in from a customer and they were swearing around the lunch table, and the customer was kind of appalled. So I said, "Did you explain to the customer that this is part of your normal everyday culture and that you would not talk to the customer like that?" He said, "No, but I will." So he did, and the customer was quite relieved. And the customer said, "Yeah, you guys never swear with me." No, of course not. It's an internal thing, not an external thing. I'm a big swearer also. It's a problem. So it's really important if you think about culture to think about this quote from Grunet and Whitaker. The culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behavior the leader is willing to tolerate. And you have seen that in your organizations. You have seen people because not be not nice to other people, and they're still tolerated in the organization, often because they're so wonderful. Yeah. So yeah, it's really a hard thing when you think about the culture of the organization and what people are willing to tolerate and not willing to tolerate. So when I'm challenging you, I suspect, in many ways, and I don't think you have to be perfect at all. You can work a little bit on progressing in one way or another, and I ask for behaviors, not beliefs. So I have never found that I had to change my beliefs or my mindset first. I have always found that I have to change my behaviors. Start with yourself wherever you are, and remember that people remember how you make them feel. And if you don't know why for the work, for the product, for the organization, nothing else matters. So I would like to stay in touch. There's all kinds of ways and for you to contact me. The Modern Management Made Easy series is still in progress on LeanPub. I'm at the indexer right now, so hopefully soon the books will be available.
All right, well, Marie and I and Katie, if you want, we'll hang out for a little bit, and Johanna will let you go, and everybody else, thank you for joining. We appreciate it, and we'll hopefully see you in November at the mashup.